Hello, Riven mains and Yasuo mains alike. I'm the Nightwing, and here to bring you guys another League of Legends video talking about G2 and how they became one of the best League of Legends Western organizations, among doing several other things in the scene. And I thought it was fitting to make this video right after they won MSI, but I wanted to collect my thoughts on a lot of the other things going in, and they have made a substantial mark in not only Europe but now also cementing themselves as a team that should be feared and an org that should be feared going into other international events. If you're including Rift Rivals in that, they will most likely always be taking part of Rift Rivals. That's just how the organization is. So the organization comes into the EU LCS after they relegate SK Gaming. Yes, they actually relegated SK Gaming at the end of the summer 2015 split. This is when SK still had Sven Skaren on the lineup. They relegate SK and secure a spot in the EU LCS. Then after that, they bring in Trick, who formerly played for CJ Entus, and they bring in Emperor, who had played for I think a couple of Korean teams as well. I forgot the team Emperor had previously played on, but he was a featured carry on that team as well. I'm pretty sure he was on Rebels Anarchy, or he was on a Freak of Freaks. I'm not too sure about that, but nonetheless, he comes to G2. When they actually burst onto the scene for EU, they are completely a head and shoulder above their competition. Because at this current point in time in Europe, it was pretty much just Fnatic. Then you had Origin kind of coming off of their semifinals run, and then you had new teams kind of building up in Europe. And then you had H2K coming up as well as another superstar team. So you had competition. But when G2 came in this initial split, they finished 15-3 in the regular split. Most of their games were utter dominance. You had Perks making his debut in the mid lane. You had Trick making his debut in the EU LCS as a jungler. They completely are the best mid and jungle duo, them taking over the entire scene in general. They did drop games. They dropped one to Fnatic, one to H2K, and they dropped another game to Vitality at one point. So those were their only 3 losses during that split. They later on, to secure a playoff bye, they later on beat Fnatic in a very convincing fashion, and then they beat Origin in another convincing fashion, a 3-1. All of their playoff series were pretty quick nonetheless, and this is with Kikis still playing top lane. Now, overall, looking back at that split, I liked that G2 came into the league and challenged the other teams, because at that current point in time in EU LCS, it was very much a top-heavy region, as like it was literally only like Fnatic, Origin that just came up and became a good team. Unicorns of Love were kind of there. Then you had Vitality coming up to a certain standard, and you had H2K also coming off of their Worlds run, so they were looking to rebound as well. But G2 completely changed expectations, and you had the new superstar mid laner Perks in the mid lane as well. Now, going into MSI, it's a little bit still confusing as to what happened. There is still, to this day, a lot of speculation as to what happened. They took some time off. I think Perks had said in a interview that they had some inner turmoil. Now, that might have been due to the fact that maybe before they went to MSI, they actually scrimmed against some Korean teams, and maybe they lost a lot of games, and at that point, they were looking to switch up the roster. So they go into MSI. They really don't do so well. They win against the Supermassive both times, and they lose to SKT. They lose to CLG twice, and they lose to RNG twice. They lost to pretty much every team that made playoffs twice, which inevitably ended up knocking them out, since they were literally only 2 games ahead of Supermassive, and Supermassive's only win came off of actually beating CLG in that one round. So they exit MSI, and they are literally branded as the villains of the EU LCS. Now, that narrative itself, I never really liked personally, due to the fact that, you know, just because a new team comes in doesn't mean they're the villain. I get that's why like they were honestly portrayed like that, but I do feel like that wasn't really a right narrative to portray on them, just because people had become so beloved to Fnatic, Origin, and H2K that it was really surprising to see a much better org and a much better team succeed over them. And that wasn't really shown in Europe for a very long time. And I feel like people took that narrative and kind of ran with it a little bit too soon, because you have to understand they were a new org at the time, a new team, so they're going to run into problems at certain points when they face the better teams. It just happens all the time in League of Legends and in any sport competitively in general. So after MSI, they switch out the bot lane, they switch out the top lane at one point during week 6 and 7. They bring in Expect in the top lane between week 6 and 7. They still are winning a whole massive amount. This is when, for that one split, Europe went to best of 2s. And even with that, G2 was still an incredible team in general. And then this is when they brought in Sven and Mithi. They had a few troubles here and there, but overall, they were still a very dominant force. They were still heading to playoffs on a bye. They beat Splice 3-1. They go to the 2016 World Championship. And at the 2016 World Championship, this is when you kind of see the cracks start to show for their performance. I believe in EU at this current point in time, a lot of teams just weren't really able to beat the caliber that G2 was able to produce, but at Worlds, like I said, facing off against the better teams, they are getting challenged, and they lose to CLG twice. They end up losing to Rox Tigers both times, and in that one Rox Tigers game, they theoretically should have won it, but overall, Smeb being an amazing Kennen player and one of the best performing top laners at the tournament, obviously it resulted in one of their losses. And they did beat Albus Nox Luna the second time around, but they did not beat them the first time around. And so with that, they leave Worlds going 1-5, and that's when people start going, well, they probably shouldn't be representing EU if they're just not going to take it seriously, or they're just not going to basically try at the event. I still don't believe to this day that they didn't try. It was just more like you just get outplayed. Sometimes during the game you just lose and you just get outplayed. That's just how it works. Sometimes you do have good players, but the other rosters have good players too in their own personal right, and it just all depends on who mashes up and who actually, plays the game the better way during the patch, who plays the way better at the meta at the tournament, because most specifically metas for Worlds, MSIs, and stuff like that, specific metas start to arise, and whatever team catches on faster usually tends to be the better team. So after the 2016 World Championship, the whole roster decides to stay together, and then this is when the G2 roster plays best of 3s in Europe, because Europe adapts to best of 3s at this point, along with the North American LCS that did this as well during this current point in time. Now, you have this best of 3 format. They literally destroy everybody. There are very few times they actually went to a game 3. There was very few times they're actually even challenged in this specific split, where you had Unicorns of Love actually doing pretty well. In Unicorns of Love were actually, that looking back now, that was actually one of their best splits they ever had, personally, as an organization, in my own personal opinion. But G2 overall were very, very good. Like, you had Unicorns of Love, you had Fnatic there, but it really looked like they were just head and shoulders above the rest of their competition. And they lose one best of 3 out of 12. They were literally one game away from being the next undefeated team in Europe at that point in time. They lose to Rocat. Rocat's miracle run is ended because Fnatic beat Misfits, and then after that they can't make playoffs. G2 go to playoffs with a bye, and then they obviously defeat another team. I forgot the team they actually beat. They ended up beating, they beat Fnatic in a very, very pretty close series, all things considered. Remember, this is when Caps and Jezzes were in Fnatic's lineup. They were going through a lot of struggles. Then after that, you have G2 facing off against Unicorns of Love in the finals. It is a quick 3-1. Unicorns of Love got one game with a talent pick. After that, G2 win their next title. And at this point, they've won 3 titles in a row. And then After that, they go to the 2017 Midseason Invitational, and this is when everything starts to change. As what I noticed, they have their issues in the group stage. They have a pretty comparable group stage, like the other teams that barely made it in, like Flash Wolves, like TSM. And I'm pretty at this current point in time, a lot of EU fans are like, man, this is the team that's still representing us. Yeah, it's looking like the same way they're gonna present themselves at the other past 2 international events. But when it gets to the playoff setting, they face off against Team WE, and then after that series, a lot of people start to get the notion that they're here to play. They want to represent EU really well. This is when I think the roster really did come together at a certain point. I mean, Trick at this current point in time, he was starting to fall off a little bit, but he was still able to sufficiently play around his laners the way they needed to be. They beat Team WE 3-1 in that actual knockout round and face off against SKT. And you're actually like, G2 made the finals. They've redeemed themselves. They're not the villains at a certain point. They're like an anti-hero at this point, and you're like, can G2 beat SKT? SKT have other plans in the series. Perks had an incredible performance against Faker in that series. A lot of the players did step up, but it just wasn't enough for the SK team at that current point in time. So SKT beat them 3-1, and they lose. They go home, second place, but they did redeem themselves, and then a lot of people started getting behind them, and they're like, okay, you got second place at MSI. Good job. At least you redeemed yourself to a certain extent. We know you're here to play, and we know you take it seriously now. Going into the summer split, this is when, at a certain point, they start to actually have a slow start. They did have a short vacation because the very first games I remember, they played like Lulex and stuff like that, and they faced off against like Rocat, and he had like a bunch of subs, and it wasn't going too well. The roster itself came back together at a certain point. They did not look really cohesive at that current point in time. This is like the split I would say was kind of rough for them at a certain pace. It really looked like they were just playing the game at a different way. After that, Rift Rivals comes up. This is the very first Rift Rivals where Cloud9, TSM, P1, G2, Unicorns of Love, and Fnatic go. Obviously, this is one of Europe's very, very worst performances against North America for their standards. G2 go 1-5, so they replicate their MSI record from their 2016 and 2016 Worlds and MSI records, going 1-5. Or they completely just bottom out and only beat Cloud9 once during that Rift Rivals. After that, G2 kind of start ranking up a bit. So after that, they face Splice in a really, really close series and a hard-fought victory over Splice. They win 3-2. Mithy outplays Senkux on the Alistar pick. Then after that, they go on to just completely wreck H2K, and then after that they go to completely wreck Misfits in the finals. They win 3-0 in both the semifinals and the finals, taking themselves to a 9-1 record going into the 2017 World Championship. Now, looking back at that now, this is the first split where G2 go through the quarterfinals. This is one of the first splits where it's like, wait, they didn't get the bye? No, they didn't, because they did not perform that well during the regular split. So with that being said, we got to see the team grow with each best of 5, and obviously teams like H2K, like Misfits, had a hard time facing G2 in a best of 5 setting compared to a best of 1, where you can get the upper hand on your opponent at any given point in time. So they qualify for the EULCS for 2017 Worlds, and they at this point they have won yet another title. And then at this point they go to Worlds. They actually theoretically should have gotten out of the group if they had won a couple more key games at certain points. That's why they realistically didn't get out. Cloud9 has been able to get out of Worlds groups with 3-3s. This group was the group of death. You had G2, RNG, Samsung Galaxy, and you had 1907 Fenerbahce. G2 go 3-3. Obviously, they do beat RNG. This is when they also They have a really close set of games with Samsung, and they beat Fenerbahce 2 times. Yasuo is even locked in for Perks in the very last Fenerbahce game, and it really feels bittersweet. After this, they disband, and they've used Trick, Expect, Perks, Sven, and Mithy for a very long time, and then now going into the 2018 spring split is when they completely build around their mid laner Perks. Now this is during a current point in time at which this is like, I relate this to the TSM aspect of when TSM went through a massive rebuild after the 2015 World Championship, where they completely just built around their mid laner. Perks goes through this trial during this split. Now, this split is very interesting by them, and because you get a lot of new coaches, you get a lot of new players, you have grabs coming in, you have them picking up Yarnin and Wadid from Rocat, you have Wonder coming over, you have Yankos coming over. So theoretically, going into this split, they were still power ranked second, first. Some people like lowest had them at third. So they go through the season with an 11-7 record, beating Splice in a tiebreaker for second. They 3-1 Splice later on, and then later on face Fnatic, and their former coach Youngbuck actually and his new Fnatic are able to take them down. Now this is the first time at this point during 4 titles in a row that G2 lose, and this spoils over into G2's summer split, where initially it looks really good for them during the funnel meta. Then after that, they go 9-0, they go to Rift Rivals, they look pretty dominant for Rift Rivals, all things considered, until they lose 1 game for Europe against Echo Fox in the best of 5 that all the teams played in. And then going back to the EULCS, they started faltering. They eventually fell from 2nd to 4th because of tiebreaker games. And then they go into the Misfits series where they get absolutely obliterated. This is the first time them going into a playoffs and they actually just get demolished in the first round. They didn't even reach the finals for the first time, and they had to actually go through the regional qualifier. They faced the regional qualifier teams in Splice. They beat them 3-2, and then they faced Schalke, and going through Schalke 3-1. Though they were underdogs in that series, and a lot of people had predicted that Schalke could take them down, but G2 prevail and go in as the 3rd seed for EU. This is the first time they go through the regional qualifier at the 2018 World Championships, and this is the first time they're going in as the 3rd seed rather than 1st or 2nd. Now you go into the Worlds 2018. You go to the play-in stage. They lose to Supermassive once, and then they actually end the group with a decisive. I'm pretty sure it's a 3-1 record. I'm pretty sure. They go into the quarterfinals, clear underdogs against a lot of the teams they actually face in the quarterfinals of a lot of these international events sometimes. But they do manage to qualify for the main event, beating Infinity Esports. They have a group of Afrika, Flash Wolves, and Fangwu Buffalo, and this is where the Mr. Buffalo curse begins. They lose to Fangwu Buffalo, and they definitely get out of the group with some conventional non-picks with the Heimerdinger bot lane, but they're able to pull it through. They're able to get out of the group. Afrika and G2 get out of the group, and they get out of the group, and they actually go up against RNG. Now, in this series specifically, this was one of the greatest upsets in league history, in my own personal opinion. You had RNG completely drafting disrespectfully against them, thinking that they could win every single laning phase with weaker picks, even though they also drafted losing lanes as well. G2 pull off the series with an incredible performance. Game 5 was insane from Perks, Yankos, Wonder, and Yarnin and Wadid, and also Wonder playing incredible. You also have them qualifying for the semifinals, where they're eventually knocked out by Invictus Gaming, who later on led to win Worlds 2018. Now, going into the 2019 split, they are accepted into franchising, and what do G2 do? They also decide to rechange their roster again. So they drop Yarnin, Wadid. They're like, hey, Caps, you want a shot at winning another title? Caps goes to G2, and then Perks moves to bot lane, and they get Mickey, and Mickey was also on Mickey also was on Misfits during 2018, and Mickey and Wonder, who also played a best of 5 against G2 back in summer 2016, are on the same team again. And as you know, Mickey and Wonder were a really strong top and support duo on Splice back then, bringing that to G2. They were also touted as some of the best players in Europe, and G2 were pretty much really dominant for a little bit. There was a certain points in time where you're probably thinking like, man, can this actually work? But Caps, being an incredible player, later on, G2 lock first place. Then they also face Origin in the first round, where they actually play first and second now for the LEC for their playoff seeding. After game 1, G2 dismantle Origin. They go to the finals, where they eventually face Origin again, and they dismantle Origin in the fastest series in Europe League of Legends history. And then they win their 5th title as this new roster, with Perks moving to ADC and having Caps come into the mid lane. Caps, as a big defining factor for G2, this split really made the difference. And then it leads into 2019 MSI, where G2 go up against their stacked competition at the 2019 Midseason Invitational. Now, with that being said, we are going with the added aspect of, wait a minute, can they actually be able to hold off the teams at MSI? Because what was said about the team was that they couldn't play late game. They really had no macro. They could, they weren't challenged in Europe, and Origin didn't challenge them in their best of 5s that they played. And well, that's not the case. They actually 2-0 SKT. Now they finished the group stage 5-5. They dropped 2 games to Funku Buffalo. They lost 1 to Team Liquid, and they dropped the 2 to IG, obviously giving them the 5-5 record. I actually predicted them going into the SKT series. I thought they had a lot of strengths that SKT didn't have. I think that when you look back at the series, SKT also drafted not so good around their players as well. They beat SKT, and that series, in my own personal opinion, was the finals of the 2019 Midseason Invitational. In my own personal opinion, that was the final to me. After the G2 beat SKT in a very close series, 3-2, G2 qualified for the finals. And that previous day before, Team Liquid upset IG. TL's like, hey, you beat RNG last year as the underdogs. TL's like, a dish is best served cold. Right after that, G2 dismantled Team Liquid in the fastest international best of 5 ever. They dismantled them. Team Liquid should be ashamed of themselves for playing that series. So G2 win their first international title for Europe. Europe had not won an international title in a very long time. Most people don't count Rift Rivals, because Rift Rivals shouldn't be counted for anything other than that it's a spectator event. So they win the MSI 2019, and now Europe has 2 trophies. Only 1 counts in the 29, as in this trophy right here. So as they go through all these trials and tribulations, being called the Villains, staying on vacation, they really, Ocelot and his org really proved that you can go through a lot as a team and as an org, but at the end of the day, being the person that can stand up and get back up is what really is able to actually hold someone up, and being able to be that person that, yeah, you can get knocked back down, but if you can get back up, you can win. And it's shown that they always bring around the best players that they can bring around. They're not bringing players that, don't want to win or don't want to try. And this year, more than anything, has shown that. Now that they finally won an international event, looking back on this now, you have to kind of factor in, is this one of the best Western League of Legends rosters and organizations? Yes, they are. And I think that you can't discredit that in any way. And if they came home second place, that would still be more better than a lot of people predicted. But that's not the case, because going into this event, people actually predicted them to win MSI. I thought they had a very good shot at winning MSI as well, given the fact that they have a really strong top side going into the event, with Perks and Mickey being a decent, solid bot lane that could, hold their own against the top tier bot lanes in general. So for, G2 being one of the best Western organizations from all that they've shown, incredible splits in general, They've won 5 titles. They've won an international event. And this is something that Fnatic, Cloud9, and TSM have all thrived for in these past years. And now G2 has won it. So let's see if any other Western team can actually eventually win a international event. So let's see how this G2 roster pans out for 2019 Worlds. They're going to Rift Rivals before the time of me making this video. So this is a very, very fun video to go over this long storied EU organization that just came into the league 3 years ago and is not stopping anytime soon. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like, comment, subscribe. Most of all, enjoy. I'm the Nightwing signing out. Hashtag G2 win. Hashtag G2 Army. And good job G2 for being one of the first Western organizations to win an international event and prove the West can face Korea, the West can face China. It all depends on how you go and you play your game, you play your style, you play to your strengths, and you play the way you want to play. And you got to always get back up. See you guys later. Like, comment, subscribe. Most of all, enjoy. I'm the Nightwing signing out. See you guys later. Bye. Have a good day.